Hello everybody, welcome back to our calculator building tutorial. In the previous video, we built out this keypad here that we're going to use for the bottom part of our UI. In this video, we're going to go ahead and finish out the UI. So we're going to build this screen here that we can use to display our numbers that we're inputting. And then also you can write your equation on top as you're building it. And we're going to build this list up top, which is just a display of all of the equations that we've previously entered within this calculator session. So let's just get started on that. In our presentation layer, let's go ahead and make a new Kotlin file. And we're going to call this display screen. And you technically don't have to do this in a new file, but just to keep things clean, I like to keep all of my different components separated in their own files. And then within this display screen, we're going to have a couple functions here. We're going to have our, well, they're all going to be composables. We're going to have a display screen function. And this is going to take in a state. And that state's going to be our calculator state. And the reason we need a state here is because the data that we're displaying here is dependent on information that the user is entering, which is going to be read in from our state and tracked in our state in our view model when we get around to actually building the view model. So now we're also going to hand it a modifier, and we are going to give that just a default modifier. We can override that later if we need to, but right now we'll just leave it at the default. And we're going to start with a column. So within this display screen, essentially we're going to have a column with two rows inside of it, one row for the equation and then one row for whatever number we're currently entering. So within that column, we're going to give it a few parameters. First, we'll set our horizontal alignment equal to alignment.end. Then we'll do our vertical arrangement, and we're going to set that equal to arrangement.space evenly. And then we're going to give this a modifier as well. And in that modifier, I'm going to fill my max width. I am going to wrap content height because we're going to have two rows and we're going to restrict those each to one line. And we don't want our height of our calculator screen changing. And then I'm going to do a clip function on that. And we're going to do a rounded corner shape, which is 15 dp. You can do whatever you want here. I just find that 15 dp kind of fits and works with the style that I'm going for. And then our background, we're going to set that equal to our screen background color that we defined in the color.kt file earlier. And then I'll just give it a little bit of padding here, maybe 6 data pixels, and we'll see how that looks. We can come back and change that later if we need to. Okay, so within this screen, we're going to have our column, and then within that column, we're going to need two separate rows. And because those rows are going to be fairly similar, I actually like to separate that into a separate function. So I'm going to add another composable here. And we're just going to call this, we'll make it private because we're only going to call it from here. This is going to be our screen row. And then in there, we're going to need to, anything that needs to vary between the two of them, we're going to need to pass in as a parameter. So font size, we're going to pass that in as an int. We're going to pass in our text because our text is going to be different between the displayed number and then our equation up top. So we'll pass that in as a string, and then we'll hand it a modifier. And if we don't want to override that, we'll hand it just the default standard modifier. And then within here, we're going to add a row. Within the row, we'll go ahead and give it our modifier parameter. And then within that row, let's do a spacer, just so they're not too close together. And we'll do, for that spacer, we'll set a modifier dot width, and we'll give it 4 data pixels. So not too much, but just enough to keep them separate. And then within that text field, we're going to go ahead and hand it our text from our parameters. We're going to hand it our font size, also from our parameters. And that one actually we have to do font size.sp because that's not taking an int, but we're taking our parameter in as an integer. And then max lines, we're going to set equal to 1 because we don't want this to overflow onto the next line. We don't want the text to wrap there. And then our overflow, we're just going to set that to ellipsis for now. I think that'll look good. And then down here, let's just do one more 4 data pixel spacer. So now that should be all we need. If we come back up to our column, let's go ahead and add our screen row. And in here, we're going to do font size equals, for the equation, I think 34 is about the right size. And then we're going to set that equal to our current equation. And our modifier, we're just going to pass it our modifier parameter. And then after that, we're just going to do one more screen row, the same thing. And then we're going to hand it a font size of 60, which I think looks good, having that bottom one just a little bit bigger. And then our text is going to be our display number from our state. And then same thing here, hand it our modifier parameter. So now that should be everything we need for the display screen. You don't have to, but I like to make a preview just so we can see that in our code before we actually run it in our emulator. So we're just going to call this display screen preview. And then inside this preview, because we're displaying data that we're going to be displaying data that's dependent on user input, we're going to need to have a state with this preview. So first, we need to give it our theme. And then in here, our state is just going to be equal to a calculator state. And we're going to need to give that some values for our display. State equals state.copy. Within here, we'll set our display number equal to 3.14, which is just a nice rounded off version of pi. We'll set number 1 equal to 3. And then number 2, I'm going to set that equal to 3.14 just to be consistent with what we have above. And then for an operation, I'm going to go ahead and hand that a math operation. And we'll just do multiplication here. Our current equation, to be consistent with what we have, really for the preview, you can do whatever you want, but I'll do 3 times 3.14 just to be consistent with what I previously entered. And then let's call that display screen. Our state's going to be equal to our state. Now, if we build our program and switch to split code view, we should see this is exactly what we want for our display screen. So now that we have that display screen all built out the way that we want it, we need to go ahead and build our history display. So do a new Kotlin class or file, make it a file. I'm going to call this one history display. And then in here, it's going to be fairly simple. We're just going to have a lazy list in here. So we're going to do a composable history display. And then we need to think about what parameters we need in this history display. So we definitely need a state because we're going to be displaying information from our state. So we'll do a calculator state. And then just for a good practice, we'll hand it a modifier and we'll give that a default. Modifier in case we don't want to override that. And then, so what we're going to do here is we're going to have a lazy column. And then inside of our lazy column, we're going to have, well, we're going to have our big long list of equations here. But you'll see if I go all the way to the top and then I do like 9 divided by, well, that's not going to work. But whatever I add, whenever I add a new equation, it's going to take me back to the bottom. So I need a way to track on my lazy column here. I need a way to track where I am. So how we can do that, we need a list for our state. So val list state equals, remember, lazy list state. And then we're going to do a launch effect for whenever the size of our equations in our state changes. So whenever that size changes, what we want to do is we want to list state dot animate scroll to item, and then the item that we want to scroll to is in fact going to be that last one that we added. So we're just going to do state equations dot size. Now, when we come down here to our lazy column, we need to pass that state into it. So list state is going to be our state for our lazy column. And then we'll go ahead and just pass that our modifier parameter as well. And then down actually within here, items, and you don't want the integer one, you want the list one here. Items state dot equations, equation. So for every equation in equations, we're going to make a row. And within that row, we're going to have our horizontal arrangement, and we're going to arrange it to the end. And then we're going to have a modifier. We're going to fill our max width just because we want these to be consistent and uniform. And then I'm going to clip that as well. We'll do a rounded corner shape, and just to be consistent with our look from before, we're going to do 15 data pixels on that. And then our background color, we're going to want that to be the same as our screen background color. And I'll just give that a little bit of padding. So now within that row, we're not going to need a whole lot. Pretty much we need a spacer. We'll give that maybe 4 data pixels should be enough. And then after that spacer, we'll need our text field to actually display our equation. So our text is going to be equal to equation. Our max lines, I'm going to set that equal to 1 so that we don't wrap around onto the next line. Overflow, I'm going to do the same thing I did earlier just to be consistent, and that's text overflow dot ellipsis. And our font size, I'm going to set that equal to 28.sp. Then we'll hand a modifier just so that we can make sure our background is the same color here. So that should be good for the text. I'm going to give it one more spacer after that as well, just so we don't run up against the end too close. It'll make that look just a little bit cleaner. And then I'm going to also give that a height spacer, a vertical spacer here of 4 data pixels as well. So now that should be everything we need for that. Let's go ahead and make a preview for our history display as well. You don't have to build previews for everything because we're going to just combine all of these in one file in a little bit. Technically, you can just make one preview and preview them all there, but I like to have previews for all the separate components. Just it's a little cleaner and it helps with my workflow a little bit easier. So we're going to have our calculator theme, and then within the calculator theme, we're going to need a state, which is going to be a calculator state. We need to change that that equations list in there. So state equals state.copy, and then the only variable that we actually care about in here is that equations, and we're going to do a list of, and then I don't care. Let's see, 7 times 7 equals 49. 16 divided by 2 equals 8. 1 plus 2 equals 3. Okay, so now if we come down under that, we can now call our history display and set state equal to our state here. If we build this again and go to our split view, we should see that our history display is now working. And this is exactly what we want. So now we have our history display built, we have our screen display built, and then we also have our keypad display built. We just need to add a new file here, a new Kotlin Clasher file. We're going to call it calculator screen. And within this calculator screen, all we're going to need to do is have a composable that essentially calls all three of these other composables and arranges them the way that we want. So if you come into your into this file, it's going to be fairly simple. All we're going to need to do is make our function for our calculator screen. Whoop, not state, calculator screen. And in here, we're going to need a state, which is going to be a calculator state. And then we're going to need an on button press because we need to pass that to our keypad to set all of the clickable, all the clickable arguments on there. So that's going to be of type button action, and we're going to return unit. And then that should be everything we need for this composable. Let's go ahead and give it a body, import our button action. Now in here, I'm just going to do a column. Within that column, we're going to have a modifier and fill max size this time. We want to fill the whole screen. We need a background here, which is going to be our background gray that we defined in our colors file earlier. And then we need a padding. Just going to set that equal to maybe 8 dp of padding should be good. And then after that, let's go ahead and give that some vertical arrangement here. So we'll set our vertical arrangement to arrangement dot spaced by, and maybe 4 data pixels should be good there. And then a horizontal alignment we are going to set to align at the end. Because horizontally we want everything to be aligned at the bottom of our screen so that our keypad doesn't move up if our history list is smaller. We always want that to be in one consistent spot. And then within this column, it's going to be fairly easy here. All we need to do is call history display, and our state is going to be equal to our state. Our modifier, we can go ahead and set that equal to a new modifier. We're going to want to give that a weight here of 1f, just so that it's going to space everything evenly. And then we need a display screen where we set state equal to the state. And then also we're going to pull that keypad. We're going to hand it our on button press is going to be equal to on button press from our parameters. And this should be everything that we need here. So let's go ahead and build out a preview for that one as well, just so we can see how far we've come. And then we're going to call this calculator screen preview. We need to give this our calculator theme. And then in here, we need a state. And then, whoops, you got to spell them right. State equals state dot copy. Let's just give that some data. I'm actually just gonna, instead of typing all this out again, we're gonna go back to our display screen and just copy this. And back to our calculator screen, state equals state dot copy. And let's go ahead and pull data from our history display screen as well. So I'm going to steal this equations line as well. Now, all we need to do down here is call not our state, our calculator screen. Our state is going to be equal to state, and our on button press for this, we can just set it equal to nothing. Because for a preview, we don't actually need. Whoops, how did that get up there? Delete that. Let's build our project and then open up our split view again so that we can see what our display is going to look like. And you can see this is exactly what we want our calculator to look like. This is, however, still just a display from our composable. So if we want to actually get this onto our calculator screen on our phone, onto the app on our phone, we're going to need to go over to our main activity. And in the main activity, all we need to do in here is we can get rid of all this default preview and greeting. We don't want any of that. Within the set content block, everything under calculator theme, go ahead and clear that out. And in here, we're actually going to need a view model. We don't have that yet, so we'll come back and build that later. We'll just do a state for now. And we're going to set that equal to a calculator state. And then after that, we are going to do our calculator screen. And we're going to set our state equal to our state. And we're going to set our on button press equal to blank for now, because that's going to come from the view model. Go ahead and import that. And now, if we were to run our code, we should see that this builds it and actually is going to display that calculator that we built on our phone over here, which is exactly what it does. We have our UI built, but you can see this isn't a very useful calculator. There's no logic behind it. There's no view model behind it to store the state or to display anything or to calculate anything. So that's going to be the topic of the next video. We'll go ahead and add that view model that we need, and then we'll build out all of the logic for how the calculator is going to work and display the data to the user. Hope you found this video helpful, and we'll see you in the next one.